All right, can you hear me? So, welcome everyone here. Before we begin the next session, let me just remind you of the Q&A that we'll be having after the presentation. For this, please use your JNUC app. There's like a Q&A session. You need to find the session and ask the questions there and vote for them. And okay, with that out of the way, let me bring you to the stage Nick and Tom to talk about data rules, everything around me.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our presentation. I'm Tom Larkin. I'm a senior manager of DevOps and Cloud Engineering at Snowflake. I've been in IT since 1999. When I was graduating high school and going into college, I knew that if I wanted to make decent money as a broke college kid, that computer work was the right way to go. And I got a job right out of high school, actually, thanks to the 90s tech boom, doing desktop support. And through the years, I've had various jobs in education and the private sector, software companies, tech companies, and landed at Snowflake almost 5 years ago.
And I'm Nick Callister. I'm a senior software engineer at Snowflake. Similar career trajectory to Tom there. Started out in desktop support, 90s tech boom child. Been working my way around the San Francisco Bay Area tech companies ever since then. And both of us ended up at Snowflake. So it's been great.
This presentation is going to be about data and how we leverage data at Snowflake, how we use data at Snowflake, and there's two main themes to this, data-driven and data-enabled. We'll dive into those as we go through the presentation. So, why is data so important, right? Well, when you work at a fast-growing company or organization, you can guess how to scale. You can use your previous experiences as an anecdotal way to scale, or you can use data. And I prefer the last option, data, because it really helps you focus on certain areas and gaps and allows you to really build the right thing for the right purpose. Data also is great for like cross-team collaborations. It's also good for security and compliance, IT operations, roadmap stuff. Really, once you get all your data into a data tool, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. And so here's a bit of information about Snowflake. We were established in 2012. We have around 7,000 or so employees across, I think, 35-ish countries. That's just a guess off some data I looked at a few weeks ago. Snowflake is available in all three major cloud platforms, so Amazon, Google, Microsoft. You can kind of pick the cloud platform you want to use. We're a highly scalable data cloud platform. And so this is a little bit about my team here. We are a diversified set of people across the US and India. With a very different set of skills. When I built the team, I purposely did not hire only Mac admins. I hired DevOps engineers. I hired Mac admins, Windows admins, sysadmins. And we have a really good kind of dynamic skill set that we share across our small team, and we cross-train each other. So we always are expanding our skills in doing so. And just to give you a little kind of peek here of this is our software tech stacks. So we use a lot of different tools here. We like to use tools that make the most sense and tools that serve a specific purpose. We are very big into GitOps and automation pipelines. So some of these tools were chosen for those purposes. Everything on this slide you see today is in production except for SaltStack. We haven't matured our Linux VDI offering yet, so SaltStack has only been in development, but it looks like that's the tool that we're going to use when we expand our currently very small Linux VDI production deployment. Right? And so what is data-driven? What is data-enabled? Data-driven is an easy one to define. You can go to LinkedIn and search for any kind of business ops, marketing type of blog or article, and you'll see statistics quoted like 98% of executives want to be data-driven, things like that. And data-driven is just basically, at a very high-level, simplified concept of using data to help make decisions. So instead of guessing or using past experiences and biases, you look at the data and let the data kind of direct you towards the right direction. And then data-enabled, which is a little bit less talked about than data-driven, that is a human that possesses the skills to work with data and build data sets that other people can use to be data-driven. So you don't have to be data-enabled to be data-driven, but someone at your organization has to have the skills to work with data and probably be a domain expert of the data to help decision makers make their decision. Inspirational quote. It doesn't take a genius to work with data. It just takes time and effort, right? And we're going to go over some fundamentals in this presentation. So going back to the domain expert comment I just made. So when we engage with other teams at Snowflake, we always try to use the let the experts be experts kind of mantra. So security engineers are experts at security, right? If you have a security question, you just go onto Slack or maybe set up like a Zoom meeting with a security engineer and look at the data, ask them questions. Everyone in this room probably, I'm gonna make a guess here, does something with Apple devices at your job. And that means that you are the domain expert of Apple device data. And that means in a data-driven and data-enabled organization, other teams would lean on you all as the domain experts to explain the data, to help people use data in a meaningful way, because data without context isn't necessarily a good data. All right? And so this one is about kind of like data ingest, right? So there's a lot of hindsight and a lot of retrospectives here. And so we like to take the approach of just shipping the raw data. And that means shipping all of the data you can from your source of truth. And the reason is because hindsight always happens, right? And some manager or executive or some other team will be like, well, we want to know this data. And if you don't have it ingested, you got to go make that data pipeline from scratch. So we kind of just ship everything and then worry about the data in post. And this little diagram here is a very abstracted, just kind of graphical representation of kind of how you get data into Snowflake, right? You have your sources of truth or your data sources. Like Jamf, for example, is our source of MDM data on all of our Mac fleet. And so when MDM performs actions, the source of truth is Jamf. ServiceNow is our asset manager, right? That includes what asset is assigned to what human and what's the asset function and what's the asset type. So MDMs like Jamf probably don't know if a device is a primary device, a secondary device, a testing device. It may not know if this device is for a Zoom room or it's for an appliance or digital signage, right? But the asset manager will know that. So that's where the multiple sources of truth come in. You can use an API connector. You can write an API to scrape data into Snowflake. You can use third-party tools like Fivetran. Fivetran has a native connector to Snowflake. We use Fivetran to ship webhooks. You can also use some of the tools we offer. We offer a Python connector and something called Snowpipe, which allows native cloud integration. So if you can get data to S3 or Azure Blob or whatever Google's storage is. I don't use GCP, so I am the most ignorant on GCP. You can use something like Snowpipe to really just get in there. And then last, we have what's called the data marketplace. This is the best option because that means you as a Snowflake customer don't have to do anything. The vendor does an integration, and you log into Snowflake, and your data is automatically securely shared with you. We do have a few vendors that use data sharing through our marketplace, and it's awesome because I don't have to do data pipelines, which means I don't have to do any of the maintenance or, kind of like, I guess, labor that comes with monitoring a data pipeline. So, right? So let's talk about, being a SQL chef, right? How do I cook up some queries? We're going to start with some fundamentals here. All right? So this data actually tells a story. The query's pretty simple. The data itself is powered by a Jamf policy webhook. And policy webhooks do have very limited data sets, but it's good enough to get most of the job done. And if you kind of go left to right here, this slide, I think, was a month ago. So a month ago, we had 27 million policies that Jamf Cloud has executed in its total lifetime since we ingested data. We have not ingested data the entire time we had Jamf because when we were a smaller startup, I did not work at Snowflake, and we did not have the webhook shipping. We've had webhook shipping, I think, for about 3 years. So that's 27 million policies in about 3 years. And you'll see that I'm just doing a very simple single table query, and I'm saying, hey, give me all the policies in this ID range. And what I did is I went to self-service, and I got all the Jamf JSS IDs of the self-service policies. And I was like, give me those. And I did the inverse, right? So where it says in and has that array of policy IDs, I just literally put not in, and that does the inverse of it. And what this data tells me is that self-service is less than 1% of my policy execution at my company. So we're not a very big self-service company. We're a very big automation company. And this tells me as a previous team lead and now a team manager that we need to focus on automation now because that gives us the best results. But the data also tells me that self-service is probably being underutilized. I don't know why. Is it a bad UX? Do people not like it? Do people just not like clicking buttons? We got to go out and have conversations with people about that. But this data surfaced that. And it helped me kind of really set direction to get the results and meet our SLAs because we have very aggressive patching SLAs. We're a data company, so we're literally under every compliance under the sun, and our SLAs are pretty aggressive. Right? So some more webhook data, right? So those of you that have a background like me may have at one point in time managed infrastructure. I've also been a Linux administrator and a Unix administrator during my career. And you can set up tools like Zabbix and Prometheus and Nagios, and you can get monitoring and metrics data from your infrastructure. In a SaaS model, no SaaS vendor will ever give you host access. And that's a good reason because that's a security risk. And so we use webhooks to kind of monitor application health, right? How many users are authenticating? How many policies are running? How many recons are we running a day? If these numbers spike in any direction, it tells me something's probably wrong. And we can set up alerting for stuff like that. Right? But what if you wanted to take that Jamf data to the next level, right? So data by itself is better than nothing, but data with friends is so much better. And so you really should invest a little bit in SQL, in my opinion. However, Snowflake does support other languages like Python and JavaScript. So if you're completely anti-SQL and you want to write a query in JavaScript or Python, you can definitely do that. And so let's go into a bit deeper dive. On the bottom there, you will see an actual webhook. This is a webhook being displayed in Snowflake. So webhooks, if you're not aware, have two high-level keys, a webhook key and an event key. you'll see that the event key is actually a column in this view here. And the other webhook key, which I'm not displaying here, is just metadata about the webhook. Webhook name, webhook ID, timestamp the webhook ran. It's not relevant to the slide, so I didn't put it in there. This webhook is also very old. It's one of the first ones we ingested because the operating system is Catalina, right? And the great thing about webhooks is that for things like inventory, right? We all know recon is expensive, right? It's a lot of compute. If you recon your Jamf Cloud or on-prem Jamf instance too much, you will DDoS yourself. But a recon at restart typically is not too expensive because people aren't rebooting their computers constantly. That means we can have a recon set at reboot, and guess what happens at every OS update? You reboot, right? Webhooks are near real time. I don't use the word real time, near real time, because it is a matter of moments that we get the webhook in from Jamf into Snowflake, but it's very quick, within a few minutes. And we can get near real-time analysis of OS updates, right? So let's go take a look at a dashboard. This is our production macOS fleet dashboard. We've got a lot of data here. We've got data from ServiceNow. We've got data from our HR application that gives me think like employee directory. I can look you up. I can look up who your manager is, what team you're on, what your job title is, what location you're at, what office you're at. Every job typically has some sort of employee directory. That's all the HR data is in Snowflake. It's just basically a giant database of employee directory. And we can split it up by department. We can by operating system. We also have what's called a VIP split out here. So a big theme of mine is I never, ever get rid of data. I just filter it into relevant buckets. So, executives, right, have a very different life than an individual contributor, an IC, or even a manager. And they're in a lot of high-level, meetings and with high-level stakeholders. So VIP users are executives or people that are just, need that extra kind of IT touch. Leave of absence, right? So you probably have been approached by your security team and been like, why aren't these 50 computers patched? And you're like, oh, well, those employees are on leave. Some countries actually have labor laws where you cannot contact someone on leave. It is illegal to contact them. So, we added that in, and that way, when we look at the non-compliant devices, if a non-compliant device is in a VIP bucket or an LOA bucket, we know that if it's on leave, no contact. When they get back from leave, we'll remediate. If it's a VIP, we say, hey, executive IT people, go do your magic with the executives. And we also like to kind of display OS upgrades by department to see kind of what department is lagging behind, what department might need help, or maybe the update is just too disruptive for that department, right? That's what that data kind of shows. And then, we like to trend it, right? So in that middle kind of right slide is a 90-day snapshot of operating systems. Now, here is an example of a query that I wrote for that dashboard. And you will see that it outlines the things I just discussed, right? We also add in things like security agent data, because if your agent on your Mac is not sending data to the cloud, then your agent is busted, and we just need to fix it. This is probably on the higher complexity level of SQL that I write, and I wanted to display this because this really isn't that bad. It will take a little time and effort if you're new to SQL. If you are an old hand at SQL, this should be easy for you to pick up. So you don't have to get super complex. You're not doing like data science level stuff. You're not writing algorithms or doing like linear algebra to build metrics. You're just joining some sources of truth and getting some raw data displayed. All right. So next slide here. So here is some more webhook data. We will look at kind of the top to bottom here. So the top left, I believe, is devices that aren't checking into Jamf. So again, right, if a device isn't checking into Jamf, the asset data is missing. So what if you have like 100 devices that just went through hardware refresh, right? They're probably sitting in an IT closet somewhere. They're probably marked as like, refresh or maybe like used in your asset manager. Well, you don't want those devices to set off alarms. Again, MDMs don't have that knowledge. Asset trackers do. We also track like disk encryption as a pretty easy one to track and tackle because it's a compliance standard. And every device must have a keyed file vault config on every Mac. So, we do know that when a device is provisioned, it goes through normal states, several states, and it does not have a file vault key at first. So when it's in a not encrypted state, that's fine, as long as it doesn't stay there for too long. Same thing with pending. Pending, we know the file vault 2 payload has been executed. It just hasn't fully encrypted yet. So as long as those two states don't stay that way for very long, they're not too concerning. But if a device stays in one of those states for a threshold of time, we will cut a ticket and have our help desk or tier 2 reach out. So, this one is, data models, right? So obviously, when you get this raw data in, you want to make it consumable for other people. And, we had a kind of a mantra at a previous job of mine was always try to make things easier for others before you make them easier for yourself. And I think that applies here because if your data is easily consumable, then other people can take advantage of it easier and have just, a better experience with it. And so ServiceNow, if you all use ServiceNow here, you might know that ServiceNow has 11 billion CMDB tables. It is a massive product. It also is very complex. And I am not an expert at ServiceNow by any means. So what I did is I reached out to my local ServiceNow experts at my job. And I'm like, hey, how do I get a handle of this asset data? And so this is what's called a view in Snowflake. So at the top here, I am putting human readable names because how many people know what an ALM asset table is? Yeah, right? Nobody but the ServiceNow team. Exactly, right? So I abstract these kind of more esoteric names that are product specific into human readable names. And then below that is just my query and all of my CMDB joins. Here I'm adding like VIP status and LOA status. So our ServiceNow instance is connected to our HR system. So ServiceNow can consume the HR data automatically. And then we have a continuous data pipe from ServiceNow into Snowflake. That means upstream, when the HR data changes, it automatically changes into ServiceNow. And since ServiceNow automatically pipes data into Snowflake, we automatically get it downstream. This is where upstream data changes are automatically shown up in Snowflake downstream. And when you make it easy, right, this is what the query is. This is a list of all of my devices. I'm also a horrible offender of devices. Working in IT, I have a lot of test devices. Also, if a test device is like running something and I'm impatient, I will go grab another test device, right? And so a simple select all from this assets view that I created and I filtered by my email address, which that's not my real email address, by the way. You'll see these are all the systems I've owned and the complete life cycle. Some are retired. So the thing about Snowflake is IT data is not big data. It's just a bunch of data. So you can store this historical data in Snowflake literally forever. All right, let's move on. Okay, so, this goes into the data-driven portion, right? So when we get into, I like to call it data detective work because you literally are playing detective. When you first get a hold of this data or you first kind of experience it, you might have a lot of questions like, what's this mean or whatever, but the data points you in the right direction. And this is where you use the data to drive decisions. And this is where my colleague Nick will take over.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to go through a couple examples now of places where being data-driven helped us solve some problems at Snowflake. So the first one we're going to go through is we were given a goal by security to patch all vulnerable applications on all endpoints. They didn't care how the application got on there, whether we deployed it, Santa installed it, it didn't matter. If it was vulnerable and present on a Snowflake endpoint, their attitude was it's our responsibility to patch it. So to do that, we deployed the Nessus agent to get vulnerability data from all of our endpoints. And obviously, the next thing we did was ingested all of that data and analyzed it in Snowflake. One thing I do want to point out here, every other example I'm going to go through here involves data that we ingested and analyzed in Snowflake. I'm not going to call that out on the rest of them. Just assume that, even though it's not on the slides. So we ingested it, analyzed it, and use that to prioritize high-value applications, defining that as the applications that were most prevalent across our fleet and had the highest degree of scary vulnerabilities in them. And we use that to basically do resource allocation because we don't have infinite headcount and infinite people to work on these things. We had to prioritize where we would get the greatest bang for the buck in the shortest amount of time. And then we use that to build dashboards, which Tom already gave you a little peek at. Those are basically dashboards that are always available to our management. They're always up to date, so anytime they want to get a snapshot view of what's going on with the fleet, those are always just one click away for anyone who wants to see them. And here's an example of one way that we can take the data and sort of slice and dice it. This is an example of classifying everything by vulnerability. So you can see we've got the severity there. A bunch of these at the top are lows, then we've got some highs, criticals, and then we have the number of laptops or endpoints that have the vulnerabilities present. And you can see this is not just one platform, it's Windows and Mac OS. As Tom alluded to earlier, we are planning to start offering more platforms, Linux, and some other things. As those platforms come online, that data will be included in all of these dashboards, and it'll continue to be a one-stop for all of your, curiosity about vulnerabilities. Another way that we can slice and dice this is by department. Managers love this. They get very competitive about this. They basically treat this as a scoreboard and use it for drinking games and things like that. So again, you can see, we're breaking down by platform and then by group and number of vulnerabilities that are present on the endpoints. So there's so many ways that you can slice and dice this. We have all of the metadata that Tom was talking about from our HR data, our asset manager. That gives us the ability to contextualize the data in all these extremely useful ways, rather than just saying like, well, we think it's this many of this people and we need to clean it up a little bit more. It's all done. Come on, clicker. Oh, there we go. All right, and the last one we're going to show for how we can slice and dice is trending the data over time. So this gives a historical view of how our compliance has been doing over time. You can see there's a few dips there. That's usually when Tom and I get messages in Slack from our security team asking what's going on. Usually it's because macOS has just been patched and they didn't patch Apache. And we get alerts about Log4j and Apache being out of date. So usually not a huge deal. But again, this is a view that executives love. They really just eat this up. OK, so another example that we can go through is surfacing edge cases. When you have the data, you can really find out what's actually going on. So a good example of this is VS Code. VS Code showed up on our vulnerability reports as being very prevalent in our fleet and having a number of bad vulnerabilities. So it became a high priority target, and we started patching it using Monkey fairly quickly. The thing that was surprising, though, is even though it was being patched automatically by Monkey, it was still showing up at the top of all of our vulnerability reports. We knew that Monkey was successfully patching it, so the data didn't really make sense, and we had to dig into it a little bit further. So what we did was we changed the query a little bit to give us information on the location of the application that was generating the alert. And what we found was this was actually down to VS Code being distributed as a zip file. Thank you, Microsoft. So people were downloading it. It would automatically unzip in their downloads folder, and then they would either copy it to the applications, which meant that a copy of the application was left in the downloads folder, or they literally just download it and forget about it and just leave it in their downloads folder. So these were applications where there usually was another version of VSC present on the system that was being patched and was up to date, but these in their download folders were still triggering the alerts. So we realized that we needed to do a little bit work of alerting people to cleaning up user space applications. And that's something that Tom alluded to earlier, where we can use this data to automatically generate tickets or Slack messages to people and let them know, hey, you have this vulnerable application hanging around on your system. Please get rid of it or patch it. And another edge case that we ran into is around agent data quality. So you're dependent on these agents to go out and get this data for you. Snowflake, as data lake, has really no way of knowing if the data being fed into it is accurate or not. And one thing that we found is that there are some issues that can come up with the data being reported by your agents where it's not necessarily accurate. And this is an example here, two examples actually, of Nessus data that we have had some issues with. The first one there at the top is for, you can see it's for Mozilla. Unsupported application detection is cut off a little bit there, but that's what it actually says. Basically, what is going on there is that Firefox has been patched, and the vulnerability database in Nessus has not been updated with that new version of Firefox right now. So these are all actually fully up-to-date copies of Firefox installed on these Windows machines, but they're generating critical vulnerability reports from Nessus. Now you can see here, it doesn't actually say critical, it says low. That's because we can actually change the data. Once it's ingested, we can transform it. So we knew that this data was basically just crap, so we changed it into a low because it's just noise. We actually went to Nessus and tried to work with them first and get this fixed. Their response was that Firefox needs to patch less often, which obviously was not going to happen, so we knew we needed to do something about that. Now the opposite example down here is this Microsoft Office 365, also unsupported channel detection, and you can see that that one is marked as critical. What we found when we looked into that one was it was basically the opposite situation, where Nessus was having trouble reporting on older versions of Office 365. So it was reporting them as, we don't know what version this is because they were too old. So that's why we made that one a critical, because those probably have a lot of vulnerabilities in them because they're very, very, very out of date. So we really want to get those patched quickly. All right, and the final example goes back to OS updating. And clicker, there we go. Okay, so at Snowflake, Tom alluded to this a little bit earlier, patching is P0 priority. If there was a higher priority than P0, it would be that. There is no single thing that we do that is more important, really. We have to keep everything up to date, keep everything secure. And with macOS machines, so many things are patched through OS updates. OS updates are a huge part of keeping the endpoint fleet secure. So huge priority. And, come on. There we go. So when we looked at the data in Snowflake, we saw that basically we had a small group of users that were installing OS updates fairly regularly, fairly quickly. They were doing a great job. We had another large group of people that really just weren't updating very frequently at all. They really just wanted to stay on old OSs and were not keeping up at all. So we deployed Nudge. And Nudge has done a really great job for us. It's been amazing, especially with all the issues with software update server bugs in the last few years. Nudge is great because it doesn't try to interact with software update processes on the machine at all. It just looks at what version is running on your machine. If it's not the version that you've specified, it lets the user know they need to update. So what we did see was that uptake speed greatly improved, obviously. So here's an example of a query that we wrote using historical data. When we were coming up with the slides for the presentation here, we realized we didn't actually have any visualization for historical OS data. It was just the current dashboard. So we needed to write a query to actually show this data. This took about 2 minutes for us to come up with. So what you can see here is that this is going way back into the Catalina era. We're in 2021 here. Each of these lines is a single day. And you can see we were bopping along here with just about everybody on Catalina. And then 11.2 comes out, and we get a little bit of adoption. 11.2.1 comes out, we get a little bit of adoption there. But as things go on, you can see that Catalina bar is pretty steady. The best we're getting is maybe about half of our fleet on the current OS, which is not great. And this is back when we were under 1,000 employees. So we were already having some major problems getting people to keep up before we had even grown very far. So this is the current state, current state as of August anyways, of how our patching generally goes. And you can see that there's a lot more data on this graph. So the bars are much smaller. But again, each bar is data from a single day. And you can see we started out on 13.3.1, and then 13.4 comes out. And within 2 weeks, 13.3.1 is basically gone. There's no Catalinas, there's no long tail. It's getting everybody onto the latest OS very, very quickly. As each OS comes out, it ramps up, the old OS ramps down, the new OS comes out, it ramps up, and it's really been amazing. And this visualization allowed us to prove to our management that Nudge was doing the job that we wanted it to do. There was a great degree of skepticism about Nudge initially because it just seemed too simple. People didn't really think that it would actually be effective. We have found, surprisingly, there is a small group of people, even when you get into the aggressive enforcement with Nudge, where you're interrupting their work every 5 minutes, they just live that way. So we do still have to cut some tickets, but it's gone from literally half of our fleet lagging behind to out of 8,000 machines, it's usually maybe 40 or 50 tickets that we have to cut for each OS update. So that's the other big takeaway here, is that this has scaled extremely well for us. We're now a much bigger organization than we were. We've been able to leverage Nudge for this the entire time, and it's grown right alongside with us very nicely. And having all this data in Snowflake allows us to show that to management and prove that the tools that we're using are getting the job done for them. And back to Tom.
Clear. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, Nudge is great. Having all that data allows us to really just prove to management that, one, open source is an answer, right? Two, the Mac community has really built some great tools. Nudge is one of them. I would say Nudge and AutoPKG are probably the two biggest crucial open source tools that make all these stories possible, right? And yeah, here goes some more fake inspirational quotes. I believe, and I might be wrong, that this year marks the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And so, we kind of made a little fun theme in our presentation to kind of celebrate that. Here are the key takeaways from this presentation, right? So, Jamf data is fantastic to have in your data platform because it is the source of truth of your MDM. We do both a webhook ingest and an API ingest. I ran the numbers this morning. We have just under 250 million webhooks in Snowflake. And we have about 5.5 million rows of Jamf API data. And that's just under, I believe, about 500 gigs of data over a 3-year period. In terms of like a data platform like Snowflake, that is not big data. We query that data in seconds, right? So, you know, like that's the other great thing is that Snowflake is commercially available. These types of setups and tools historically, before products like Snowflake came out, were usually talked about at like the Facebooks and the Googles and the companies that had a bunch of engineers on staff that would build in-house tools like this. Now you can just get all this commercially. You don't have to hire an army of engineers to build an internal data lake. And Snowflake scales a lot. We will probably do a future presentation on our OS query data on a different day, but that data is coming in a lot hotter and faster than the MDM data. And you know, you're probably going to have to learn a little bit of SQL or Python to use a data tool. I would say learn both, because both these things translate into lots of high-end skills. Also, when you start working with data, you just become better at data. Also, it makes you a better domain expert, right? Remember, all of you are the Apple device experts at your organization. So, you know, just get a deeper knowledge of it. And, you know, like I said, data without context is kind of useless, and data with friends is way better than data by itself. So I highly recommend, if you do use a product like Snowflake, get your HR data in there, get your asset data in there, get your security agent data in there, because that's where it really shines. That's where you really get the context. And, you know, that's about it. And I think we got one final slide. Here goes some useful links and information. There is a free trial for Snowflake, so you can go on the web, and I think they give you like 300 credit hours or something. I don't remember. Don't quote me on that. You get an X amount of credit hours for free. We also do have some free training. We also have some paid training that is more in depth, but if you go to that link, there is free training. We offer several levels of certifications. I only have the basic one myself, the Snow Pro, or whatever it is. But we have like tons of certifications that if you want to keep diving into it and make a career out of data, there's a bunch of training for that. And then, of course, Nick and myself, you can contact us on LinkedIn or on MacAdmin Slack. We will also be here tomorrow for the end of the conference, so feel free to say hi to either of us. And I thank you for listening.
Yep. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Okay, now there's space for questions. It's apparent that data ain't nothing to mess with. So, looking at the time, we have time probably for like 1 or 2 questions, but let's go straight in. With getting device data from both Jamf Pro and Fleet, are you only processing MDM data from Jamf and inventory type data from Fleet? Or why do you use Fleet for data where most of that data can also be sourced from Jamf?
I'll answer that. Yeah. So I used to work at Jamf and in a customer-facing role. I used to tell customers that Jamf is not a data lake. If you start shipping massive amounts of data to Jamf, 2 things are going to happen. You're going to DDoS yourself, and you're going to bloat your database. So shipping it to a data lake makes a lot more sense. OS Query is a cross-platform tool, right? So we also have Windows. We have Linux. So OS Query allows us to kind of make a standard data collector across multiple platforms versus trying to custom engineer something in Intune for Windows, Jamf for Mac, Google Workspace for our BYOD phone program, because we use a Google Workspace for that, and so on and so forth. OS Query also out of the box collects a lot of things that MDMs cannot collect, like browser extensions is an easy low-hanging fruit to justify. If you want more info, just find me and I'll definitely talk about it.
Thank you very much. Next one. Do you normalize data from Jamf and other sources, or just ingest the raw objects from the API for later processing?
Raw, always raw data.
Always raw.
Yeah. So remember, hindsight always happens. It's always 2020, right? And what's going to happen is if you don't ingest the raw data, you're going to be asked by a manager, by a teammate, by security, oh, can you guys go get this? And you're like, oh, that's not in our data pipeline. So you got to go make an entire new data pipeline ingest. So just save yourself the trouble and ingest the raw data. And Snowflake has wonderful tooling to model that data post-ingest so you only share and display the bits of data you want.
Right, like you said earlier, don't throw the data out. Yeah. Just sort it so you only display the things you're interested in, and then if your needs change later, you've got the data there when you need it.
Cool. Another question. Do you have any existing API or webhook for Jamf Protect or Jamf Security Cloud integration with self-service now?
We do not use either of those tools. We do use another tool called CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike has a tool called FDR, which is like Falcon data replication tool, which streams Falcon events into Snowflake. We also stream data via Firehose Kinesis from Fleet DM for OS Query. So we get that data pretty quick, and it's a pretty big pipeline. Not to say that Jamf Protect couldn't be pipelined into Snowflake. I'm pretty sure it could. It's just we just don't use it.
Great. So probably last question. What's the conversation like at your organization when an end user tries to claim imminent domain on their org-provided device and refuses to update?
I mean, basically, eventually we talk to their manager, and it becomes an HR issue. I mean, seriously, if you're not going to update your device, you're not going to be working there eventually.
We also do technically have a conditional access tool where if you are purposely not updating and knowingly running vulnerability software, we will conditional access you and you will lose all SSO access.
Yep, no Okta for you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. There are two more questions. Do we have time?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So how did you format your complex SQL queries so consistently?
Practice. I did not post any early queries I wrote a couple years ago on purpose because they looked horrendous. It's a part of the learning process, right? You got to fail before you can succeed. It's just practice. And there's lots of online resources. I will say, though, I got cheat codes. I do work with a lot of SQL experts being at Snowflake. So we have internal resources. If you do have any questions, though, feel free to reach out via Slack or LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to help and discuss.
And there's a lot of resources online, too, in our knowledge base that will help you format your queries in ways that will work as well as possible.
Yeah, our documentation is actually really good.
And the very last question, I promise. How would you use data to convince leadership that this kind of data reporting is worth the cost?
Man, that's a tough one because, you know, it's like that old saying, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't force the horse to drink it, right? Obviously, the value is that without a data lake and a data cloud platform, how are you going to know this stuff? I would say that for us personally on the client platform team, and Nick chime in here, having this data really stops us from chasing ghosts. Yeah. You know, we don't go down rabbit holes because we can run queries and eliminate things immediately. So you're going to get a labor return immediately. Also, when you work with like compliance and security engineering and corporate security and product security, right? When they go, oh, how compliant are your endpoints? Go to the dashboard. You don't have to ask me anymore. We also do what's called data sharing. So, you know, every department has their own database, IT, HR, sales, right? Within those databases are all the schemas. And so literally earlier today, while I was doing some work at the conference here, one of my security engineers back at work wanted some audit logs. And so I wrote a data model in like 5 or 10 minutes and shared a view with him. We're going to review it when I get back in town next week, but it's also offering that type of collaboration, right? So security comes in as an example and goes, hey, we want the audit logs for this. We already shipped the raw data, so I have the audit data. It just isn't modeled yet. I model it, I share it to security, and now they don't have to ask me ever again. They can just go consume it whenever they want. They can also integrate it into all of their threat detection and incident response and compliance reporting. So that's the value.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question, how to prove that this sort of insight would have value for your organization. Obviously, since we work at Snowflake, we didn't really go through that process. Sort of the assumption from the beginning was that we would be leveraging Snowflake on Snowflake as much as possible in nearly every facet of what we do. I think one of the most effective arguments that you could probably make, it goes back to the last thing that you just said, where you can really talk about the benefits to your organization as far as security and compliance. That's, I think, where we do most of the work, so that's where most of the benefit initially is going to be realized. So, I guess you could make the argument based on if you have your security people doing expected levels of loss estimations for vulnerable applications and things like that, that can attach a dollar amount to the lack of visibility that you would have without a tool like this, and that could help make the argument that a tool like this would be useful in your organization and worth the effort and cost.
Yeah, like very common scenario, and then we'll stop. Someone puts in their 2 weeks, right? HR puts that notice in their system. That data is reflected in Snowflake, so you know someone has put in their notice because now they have a last day of work in the data. And then they go to GitHub and clone a bunch of repos. Well, all those webhook events are also ingested into Snowflake. And you can analyze behavior. Like from a security compliance standpoint, the use cases are endless. IT operations fits into that because it provides context. And then we use it for our own reasons, for tracking our tools, our automation, our engineering efforts, because we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're putting the right efforts in the right place versus chasing ghosts. All
right, so that was it. So can I ask you please for another round of applause, and thank you very much.
All right, thanks everybody.